Picture this. February 1221. The city of Merv, one of the jewels of the Silk Road, shimmers in the desert heat. Behind its walls live over 700,000 souls, merchants haggling over Persian silk, scholars debating in grand libraries, children playing in fountains fed by ancient irrigation systems. The city has stood for millennia, survived empires, weathered conquests. Its people believe their walls are too high, their wealth too valuable, their civilization too advanced to fall. Then the horizon darkens, not with storm clouds, with horsemen, tens of thousands of them, moving like a single organism across the sand. They carry no siege towers, no battering rams, just bows, arrows, and a reputation that makes grown men weep. The governor climbs the walls, sees the encircling horde, and makes a fatal calculation. He surrenders. The gates open. What happens next will echo through history as one of humanity's darkest hours. Genghis Khan orders his generals to sit on golden thrones and watch. Every single inhabitant is dragged before them. Men, women, children. It makes no difference. Each Mongol soldier receives a quota. Kill at least 300 people. The streets run red for days. When the massacre ends, only 400 skilled craftsmen remain alive, spared to serve their new masters. The rest, over 700,000 human beings, are corpses rotting in the sun. Merv, the queen of the world, ceases to exist. This isn't just history. This is a story of how 200,000 horsemen nearly ended civilization itself, before diving into the forgotten stories of survival and suffering. If you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The year is 1162. Deep in the mountains of northern Mongolia, a woman named Holun gives birth to a boy clutching a blood clot in his fist. The shamans whisper that this is an omen, a sign of a great warrior. They name him Temujin. His father, Yasujai, is a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan, respected but not powerful. The Mongol steppes in this era are a fractured wasteland of competing tribes, endless blood feuds, and brutal survival. There is no Mongolia as we know it, just scattered clans fighting over grazing lands and horses, living and dying by the sword. Temujin's childhood is anything but destined for greatness. When he is only 9 years old, his father is poisoned by rival Tatars, the same tribe that had once captured and humiliated Yasujai. The Tatars mix wolf's bane into the elder Khan's ceremonial drink at a feast. Yasujai dies in agony, vomiting blood, his organs liquefying from the inside. This single act of revenge will later cost the Tatar people their existence. But that comes later. First, young Temujin must survive. His father's clan, the Tayikid, abandons his family. Custom dictates they should support the widow and her children. Instead, they leave Holun and her sons to starve on the frozen steppes. Winter on the Mongolian plateau is merciless. Temperatures plunge to 40 degrees below zero. Food is scarce. Temujin and his brothers dig for roots, catch fish with their bare hands, hunt marmots and field mice. His mother, once a chieftain's wife, now forages like a peasant, teaching her sons that survival demands brutality. The pivotal moment comes when Temujin is still a teenager. His half-brother Bektar steals food, a fish that Temujin had caught. In a world where one stolen meal could mean death, this is unforgivable. Temujin and his full brother Khazar stalk Bektar, like wolves stalking prey. They find him sitting on a hill, watching the herds. He sees them coming. He knows what they intend. He doesn't run. Temujin shoots first. The arrow pierces Bektar's chest. Khazar shoots second. The body crumples. Their mother, when she learns what they've done, beats them both and screams that they're no better than wild dogs devouring each other. But Temujin has learned a lesson that would define his empire. Mercy is weakness, and weakness is death. Years pass. Temujin is captured by the Tayikid and enslaved, forced to wear a wooden collar called a kang. He escapes during a feast, hiding in a river with only his nose above water, while his captors search for him. A sympathetic captor's son, instead of revealing his location, helps him flee. Temujin never forgets this kindness. Later, when he has power, he elevates this man's family to nobility. He also never forgets the Taikiad elders who enslaved him. When he conquers them decades later, he has them boiled alive. Temujin's rise accelerates when he allies with Togrul, Khan of the Karaite tribe and his father's sworn brother. When Temujin's young wife Borte is kidnapped by the Merkits, revenge for Yasujai's earlier theft of Holun from the same tribe, Togrul helps him mount a rescue. They slaughter the Merkits, recover Borte, but she is already pregnant. Whether the child is Temujin's or her captor's, no one knows. Temujin raises the boy as his own, but never names him as his heir. This pragmatic ruthlessness becomes his signature. By 1206, through a combination of brilliant military strategy, psychological manipulation, and utter ruthlessness, Temujin has united the Mongol tribes. At a great assembly called a Kurultai, the tribal leaders proclaim him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. He is approximately 44 years old. He has survived starvation, slavery, betrayal, and countless battles. Now he commands perhaps 100,000 horsemen. The world has no idea what's coming. But before Genghis can conquer the world, he has unfinished business. The Tatars, the tribe that poisoned his father. In 1202, Genghis and his ally Ong Khan crushed the Tatars in battle. What happens next reveals the depths of Mongol revenge. Genghis issues an order that will be recorded in the secret history of the Mongols. Execute every Tatar male taller than the linchpin of a wagon wheel. The linchpin is roughly 3 feet high, the height of a young child. His soldiers measure every male captive. Those taller than the linchpin are beheaded. Toddlers watch their fathers die. Boys watch their older brothers die. Then they too are measured. Those who have grown too tall are killed in front of their mothers. This isn't war. This is genocide. It's systematic extermination of an entire people for a crime committed decades earlier. The Tatar women are enslaved, distributed among Mongol warriors for rape and forced marriage. The Tatar language, culture, and bloodline are deliberately erased. Within a generation, the Tatars cease to exist as a people. Yet, paradoxically, centuries later, Europeans will call all Mongols Tatars, a corruption of Tatar, the very people the Mongols annihilated. This massacre establishes a pattern. Genghis Khan is not merely a conqueror seeking land or resources. He is an architect of terror, wielding mass murder as a strategic weapon. His logic is cold and calculated. Make the cost of resistance so horrific that cities surrender without fighting. Those who submit immediately are spared and incorporated into the empire. Those who resist, even briefly, are obliterated so completely that their ruins become lessons for others. By 1211, Genghis turns his attention to the Jin dynasty of northern China. The Jin rule roughly 50 million people from a position of cultural superiority. They view the Mongols as barbarian dogs. The Jin emperor sent a message demanding the Mongols pay tribute and acknowledge Jin supremacy. Genghis spits on the ground and declares, "The Khan of the Jin is weak. I shall destroy him." The Mongol invasion of China lasts over 2 decades and reduces the Jin population by an estimated 30 to 40 million people. Let that sink in. 30 to 40 million human beings. The scale is almost incomprehensible. To put it in perspective, that's more than the entire population of California, Texas, and Florida combined, erased. But China, vast as it is only the beginning. The Mongol war machine is about to turn west toward the most advanced Islamic civilization of the medieval world, the Khwarazmian Empire. The Khwarazmian Empire in 1218 stretches from the Caspian Sea to the borders of India, encompassing modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and parts of Pakistan. Its cities, Bokhara, Samarkand, Merv, Nishapur, are marvels of architecture and learning. Its irrigation systems, inherited from Persian engineers of antiquity, transformed deserts into gardens. Its ruler, Muhammad II, called the Khwarazm Shah, commands an army larger than Genghis Khan's. On paper, the Khwarazmians should win any confrontation. On paper, they're invincible. But empires aren't destroyed on paper. The catalyst for catastrophe is greed and stupidity. In 1218, Genghis sends a trade caravan of 500 merchants to Khwarazmian city of Otrar. The caravan carries gold, silver, silk, jade, immense wealth intended to establish peaceful trade relations. The governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuck, sees his wealth and makes a fatal decision. He accuses the merchants of being spies, confiscates their goods, and executes all 500 men. Their heads are piled in the city square. When news reaches Genghis, he doesn't immediately declare war. Instead, he sends 3 ambassadors to demand Inalchuck's extradition and compensation. Muhammad II, either arrogant or foolish, kills 1 ambassador and burns the beards off the other 2 before sending them back. This is not merely an insult. In Mongol culture, ambassadors are sacred, considered extensions of the Khan himself. To kill an ambassador is to kill the Khan. To disfigure an ambassador is to declare that the Khan is powerless. Genghis Khan receives his mutilated ambassadors, listens to their report, and climbs a mountain alone. He stays there for 3 days, neither eating nor sleeping, praying to the eternal blue sky. When he descends, he issues orders. Abandon the war in China. Call back the generals. Gather every available warrior. The Khwarazmian Empire must be destroyed so completely that future generations question whether it ever existed. The Mongol invasion force that assembles in 1219 numbers between 100,000 and 150,000 men. Modern historians debate the exact figure, but what's certain is that they are outnumbered. The Khwarazm commands at least 200,000 soldiers, possibly as many as 400,000. His cities are heavily fortified. His population is in the tens of millions. By every conventional measure, he should repel the invasion. But Muhammad II makes a critical strategic error. Instead of concentrating his forces and meeting the Mongols in open battle, he disperses his army as garrison troops across his cities. His reasoning seems sound. The Mongols are nomadic horsemen with little experience in siege warfare. Let them exhaust themselves attacking fortified cities. Time and distance will destroy them. What Muhammad doesn't understand is that Genghis has spent the past decade conquering northern China, learning the art of siege warfare from Chinese engineers. The Mongol army now includes catapults, trebuchets, siege towers, and something new, gunpowder weapons. Chinese fire lances, primitive rockets, and explosive bombs travel west with the horde. The Mongols are no longer just horse archers. They are a combined arms force more sophisticated than anything Europe will feel for another 200 years. Genghis divides his forces into multiple columns to confuse the enemy. His sons Joki, Chagatai, and Ogidi lead one army toward Otrar. Another force under generals Jeeb and Subutai swings far south to hunt Muhammad II personally. Genghis and his youngest son Tayyuri lead the main army toward Bokhara. But instead of taking the obvious route through the well-defended Syr Darya River Valley, Genghis does the impossible. He marches his entire army through the Kizilkum Desert, the Red Sands. Military historians regard this maneuver as one of the most audacious in history. The Kizilkum is a wasteland where temperatures reach 50 degrees Celsius in summer and plunge below freezing at night. There is virtually no water. Conventional wisdom says no large army can cross it. Genghis crosses it with 50,000 men and horses. He uses captured local nomads as guides, hopping from one tiny oasis to the next, moving at night to avoid the heat. When he emerges on the far side, he is directly behind Bokhara's walls. The defenders, expecting attack from the east, suddenly see the Mongol banners rising from the west. The psychological impact is devastating. Bokhara in 1220 is a city of approximately 300,000 people, protected by a moat and a single wall. It is not a military stronghold, but a center of Islamic learning, home to dozens of madrasas and libraries. When the Mongol army appears without warning, the Turkic garrison attempt to break out. They charge the Mongol lines. It is slaughter. Mongol horse archers, the most skilled mounted warriors the world has ever seen, encircle and annihilate the garrison in open terrain. The survivors flee back into the city. The next morning, Bokhara's civic leaders open the gates and surrender. Genghis Khan rides through the city streets to the Grand Mosque. He dismounts, enters the mosque, and climbs to the minbar, the pulpit from which Friday prayers are delivered. The assembled elders, expecting perhaps negotiation or demand for tribute, watch as the Khan begins to speak. A translator conveys his words, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Then the looting begins. The Mongols empty the treasury, taking gold, silver, jewels, everything of value. They confiscate all horses and weapons. They round up all young women and distribute them among the soldiers. The men of fighting age are separated from the elderly and children. The old and very young are locked in their homes. The able-bodied men are herded outside the city walls. What happens next is a Mongol specialty, the Khwarash. The captives are forced to march at the front of the army as human shields during the next siege. If they refuse, they're killed. If they fight effectively, they might be enslaved instead of executed. It's a brutal calculus that turns conquered peoples into unwilling accomplices in their neighbors' destruction. But Bokhara's nightmare isn't over. The city's citadel, where the last offenders have barricaded themselves, holds out for 12 days. When it finally falls, the Mongols systematically loot and burn the city. The grand libraries, containing irreplaceable manuscripts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, poetry, centuries of accumulated knowledge, are torched. The great mosque survives, but only because the Mongols use it as a stable for their horses, finding it more useful intact. Scholars would later write that the Mongols stabled their horses on the Qurans, that they dumped the sacred texts into the streets to be trampled in mud and horse dung. Whether this is precise historical fact or traumatized memory is debated, but the psychological impact is clear. The Mongols deliberately desecrate what their enemies hold most sacred. It's psychological warfare, designed to break the spirit of resistance. From Bokhara, Genghis marches to Samarkand, the jewel of Central Asia. Samarkand is larger, wealthier, and more heavily defended than Bokhara. Its garrison numbers between 50,000 and 110,000 men, depending on which source you believe. Its walls are thick and high. Its people have heard what happened to Bokhara, but they believe Samarkand is different. Too valuable to destroy, too strong to fall quickly. They are wrong on both counts. The siege lasts only 5 days. 5 days to break a city that should have held for months. How? The Mongols employ their signature combined arms tactics. Horse archers provide mobile firepower, preventing relief forces from approaching. Chinese engineers operate siege engines, hurling massive stones and incendiary devices over the walls around the clock. The Mongols drive their human shields, the men from Bokhara, forward to fill the moat with earth and rubble, sacrificing them by the thousands to create causeways for siege towers. When sections of wall collapse, Mongol heavy cavalry, equipped with lances and armor, smash through the breaches. The defenders, despite their numbers, cannot coordinate an effective defense. Panic spreads faster than fire. On the 5th day, Samarkand's Turkic garrison attempts to negotiate. The Mongols promise mercy if they surrender the city intact. The garrison agrees. They march out, lay down their weapons, and are immediately massacred. Every single one. The civilian population watches from the walls as 50,000 soldiers are butchered in the fields outside the city. The message is clear. Military resistance is futile. The Mongols then enter Samarkand and conduct a selective purge. Craftsmen, metalworkers, silk weavers, architects, engineers are identified and marched off in chains. They will spend the rest of their lives as slave laborers building palaces in Mongolia. The wealthy are tortured until they reveal where they've hidden their treasures. One contemporary account describes how women who swallowed pearls to hide them from the Mongols were disemboweled, their intestines slit open to retrieve the gems. When other women saw this, they began voluntarily surrendering their jewelry, begging to be spared the knife. Many were killed anyway. An estimated 30,000 civilians die in the sack of Samarkand. It's a horrific number, but it's a fraction of what's coming. Meanwhile, to the north, the siege of Otrar grinds on. This is personal for Genghis. Otrar is where the caravan was slaughtered, where Nalchuk triggered the war. The city holds out for 5 months, a remarkable feat of resistance. The garrison fights block by block, house by house. The Mongols, uncharacteristically, accept heavy casualties rather than bypass the city. They want Otrar to suffer. When a traitor within the garrison finally opens a gate, the Mongols pour into the city like water through a broken dam. Every inhabitant is killed except the Nalchuk and his immediate family. They're saved for special treatment. Inalchuk is brought before Genghis Khan. The governor who killed 500 merchants and beheaded Mongol ambassadors now faces the man he insulted. Genghis doesn't rant or explain. He simply gives an order. Molten silver is heated to liquid. Inalchuk is held down. The silver is poured into his eyes and ears until his brain cooks inside his skull. His screams are said to have lasted for minutes, though that may be exaggeration. What is an exaggeration is that every single person in Otra, perhaps 100,000 people, is executed. The city is burned to the ground, its irrigation canals deliberately destroyed, its fields salted. In the 13th century, Otra ceases to exist. Today, only archaeological ruins mark where it stood. But the worst is yet to come. Genghis and Tayyip marched southwest into the region of Khorasan, toward the cities of Herat, Balkh, and Nishapur. This region is a heartland of Persian civilization, incredibly wealthy, densely populated, irrigated by ancient canal systems. Genghis intends to make an example of it that will echo through eternity. Nishapur, a city of perhaps 1.75 million people, according to some medieval sources, though modern historians believe the number was closer to 100,000 to 200,000, puts up fierce resistance. The siege lasts from November 1220 to April 1221. During the fighting, a Mongol general named Takuchur, who happens to be Genghis Khan's son-in-law, is killed by an arrow fired from Nishapur's walls. This seals the city's fate. When Nishapur finally falls, Genghis Khan's daughter, Takuchur's widow, is given authority over the city's destruction. She orders that every living thing be killed, not just people. Cats, dogs, rats, birds, everything. The Mongols spend days executing the population. Contemporary accounts claim they built 3 pyramids of severed heads, one for men, one for women, one for children. Whether these pyramids actually existed or are literary horror meant to convey the scale of atrocity is debated. What isn't debated is that Nishapur is essentially erased. The city's irrigation systems are destroyed. Its libraries are burned. Its population is annihilated. In Merv, the mother of the world, the massacre is even worse. Merv in 1221 is one of the largest cities on Earth, a major stop on the Silk Road, fabulously wealthy. When the Mongol army appears, the governor does exactly what cities have done for millennia. He negotiates surrender. The gates open. Genghis Khan, still on campaign elsewhere, has given command to his son Tayyip. Tayyip makes a promise. If you surrender peacefully, you will be spared. The people of Merv, having heard the horror stories from other cities, choose to believe him. They surrender without resistance. Then the executions begin. The Mongol method in Merv is systematic. The population is divided into groups and marched outside the city walls in shifts where they are beheaded. The killing takes multiple days. Each Mongol soldier is assigned a quota, 300 for 100, sometimes 500 people to execute personally. Imagine being a Mongol warrior that week. You spend hours each day swinging a sword, severing necks, until your arms ache and your blade is notched and dulled. You wade through rivers of blood. The bodies stack so high they form hills. The smell of death is so overwhelming that birds fall from the sky. This isn't war. This is industrial-scale slaughter. Of Merv's estimated 700,000 to 1.3 million inhabitants, only around 400 craftsmen survive. Merv never recovers. When travelers pass through the area in later decades, they report vast fields of bones, skulls grinning from the sand, ruins so complete that you wouldn't know a great city once stood there. While Genghis and Tayyip are devastating Khorasan, 2 of his greatest generals, Subutai and Jebe, are hunting Muhammad II. The Khwarazm Shah, realizing his empire is collapsing around him, flees west. He abandons his capital, his army, his people. He runs because he believes if he can survive, he can rebuild. He will not survive. Subutai and Jebe pursue him with 20,000 horsemen across thousands of miles. They chase him through Persia, around the southern shore of the Caspian Sea, into the Caucasus Mountains. Muhammad II, exhausted and terrified, takes refuge on a small island in the Caspian. There, isolated and broken, he dies of pleurisy in late 1220 or early 1221. He dies knowing his empire is gone. His cities are ashes, and his name will forever be associated with catastrophic failure. But Subutai and Gebe don't stop. In one of history's most remarkable military campaigns, these 20,000 Mongols continue west. They smash through the kingdom of Georgia, defeating a much larger Georgian army. They destroy the Alans and Cumans in the North Caucasus. They cross the Caucasus Mountains in winter, something no army should be able to do, and emerge onto the steppes north of the Black Sea. There they encounter an army of 80,000 Rus princes and Cuman warriors at the Kalka River in 1223. The Rus commanders, confident in their numerical superiority, advance carelessly. The Mongols use their classic feign retreat tactic, drawing the Rus cavalry forward, separating them from their infantry, then encircling and annihilating them. 6 Rus princes are captured. The Mongols celebrate their victory by laying the captive princes under wooden planks and holding a feast on top of them, literally eating and drinking while their enemies are slowly crushed to death beneath them. Then, having defeated everyone in their path, Subutai and Gebe simply return to Mongolia. They have circumnavigated the Caspian Sea, traveled over 5,000 miles, defeated armies in multiple countries, and returned home to report to Genghis Khan. This expedition is reconnaissance for future invasions. It proves to the Mongols that the lands west of the Caspian are vulnerable. Europe has been measured and found wanting, but Europe's reckoning will wait. Genghis has unfinished business in the east. Before Genghis Khan returns to Mongolia, he completes the destruction of the Khwarazmian Empire by targeting its last significant resistance, Jalal al-Din Mangburni, Muhammad's son and heir. Jalal al-Din is everything his father was not, brave, competent, and willing to fight. He manages to assemble a new army from survivors and refugees. In 1221, at the Battle of Parwan in present-day Afghanistan, Jalal al-Din achieves the impossible. He defeats a Mongol army. It's a tactical ambush using mountainous terrain, and it's one of the very few times in this entire campaign that the Mongols suffer a clear battlefield defeat. When news reaches Genghis, he is reportedly furious and impressed in equal measure. He personally leads an army to crush Jalal al-Din. The two forces meet at the Indus River in late 1221. Jalal al-Din's army is trapped with the river at their backs. The Mongols attack with overwhelming force. The battle is desperate and bloody. Jalal al-Din fights with suicidal bravery, cutting down Mongol warriors in personal combat. But the outcome is never in doubt. His army disintegrates. Thousands are cut down or drowned in the Indus trying to escape. Jalal al-Din himself, according to legend, rides his horse off a cliff into the river and swims to the opposite bank while Mongol arrows fall around him like rain. Genghis Khan, watching from the far shore, supposedly says to his sons, that is how a father would wish his sons to behave. It's one of the rare moments where Genghis shows something resembling respect for an enemy. Jalal al-Din escapes and spends years in exile, trying and failing to rebuild resistance. He never recovers his empire. Eventually, he is murdered by a Kurdish peasant in 1231, dying anonymously and unmourned. By 1223, when Genghis Khan finally returns to Mongolia, the Khwarazmian Empire no longer exists. The death toll defies comprehension. Modern estimates suggest between 1.25 million and 2.5 million people died, roughly 25% of the empire's total population. Some regions lose 90% of their inhabitants. Cities that house hundreds of thousands are reduced to ghost towns. The sophisticated irrigation systems that sustained Persian agriculture for millennia are systematically destroyed. Canals are filled with rubble. Dams are demolished. Underground cannons are collapsed. The ecological and agricultural devastation takes centuries to recover from. Some areas never do. Genghis Khan dies in 1227, probably from injuries sustained falling from his horse, though Mongol sources are deliberately vague. He is buried in a secret location. The slaves who dig his grave are executed. The soldiers who execute the slaves are executed. An entire forest is planted over the burial site, erasing all trace. To this day, no one knows where Genghis Khan's body rests, but his empire doesn't die with him. It continues to expand under his sons and grandsons. In 1258, 31 years after Genghis Khan's death, his grandson Hulagu leads a massive army into the heart of the Islamic world, Baghdad. Baghdad in 1258 is the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, the symbolic center of Sunni Islam for over 500 years. It is a city of perhaps 500,000 to 1 million people, though exact figures are impossible to verify. It houses the House of Wisdom, one of the greatest libraries on earth, containing hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on every subject from astronomy to poetry. The Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mustasim, is not a military man. He's a scholar who enjoys falconry and patronizing poets. When Hulagu demands that Baghdad surrender and the Caliph submit to Mongol authority, Al-Mustasim makes a catastrophic miscalculation. He refuses. He sends back a message essentially telling Hulagu that the entire Muslim world will rise to defend the caliphate. This is a bluff. No one is coming to save Baghdad. Hulagu's army surrounds the city in January 1258. His forces include not only Mongols, but also Christian auxiliaries from Georgia and Armenia. These Christian troops, operating under Mongol command, are eager to sack Islam's greatest city. The siege lasts 13 days. 13 days to break a city that has stood for 5 centuries. The Mongols employ the full arsenal of siege technology they perfected over decades of conquest. Massive trebuchets hurling stones day and night. Chinese engineers operating explosive bombs and fire lances. Methodical destruction of Baghdad's walls section by section. The Abbasid army, poorly trained and poorly led, attempts a sortie and is massacred in the open field. On February 10th, 1258, the walls are breached. Mongol and Christian troops pour into Baghdad. What follows is one of the most infamous sacks in history. The killing lasts for days, perhaps a week. Estimates of the dead range from 90,000 to 200,000 in the most conservative accounts, up to 800,000 or even 2 million in more sensational sources. The truth is probably in the mid-range. Hundreds of thousands slaughtered. Men, women, children, the elderly, none are spared. Grand mosques are demolished. Palaces are burned. The House of Wisdom is systematically destroyed. Soldiers throw books into the Tigris River in such quantities that, according to multiple contemporary accounts, the water runs black with ink for months. Whether you could literally walk across the river on a bridge of books, as one chronicler claimed, is doubtful, but the image captures the cultural catastrophe. An irreplaceable repository of human knowledge, accumulated over centuries, is annihilated in days. The Caliph himself is captured. Mongol sources claim that Hulagu, respecting a superstition about spilling royal blood causing earthquakes, has Al-Mustasim wrapped in a carpet and trampled to death by horses. Other sources say he is locked in his treasury vault and starved, forced to eat his own gold. What's certain is he dies. With him dies the Abbasid Caliphate. The institution that claimed direct spiritual descent from the Prophet Muhammad, that ruled Islam for over 500 years, is extinguished. Some historians mark the fall of Baghdad as the end of the Islamic Golden Age. Whether that's historically accurate or overly dramatic is debated, but the symbolic impact is undeniable. The Mongols have done what crusaders could only dream of. They've destroyed the heart of Islamic power. And yet, the Mongol tide is about to break. In 1260, Hulagu learns that his brother, the great Khan monk, has died in China. Mongol law requires all princes to return to Mongolia for the election of a new Khan. Hulagu withdraws most of his army, leaving only about 20,000 men under General Kibuka to hold Syria and continue the conquest of Egypt. This is the Mongols' first critical strategic mistake in decades. With the bulk of the Mongol army gone, the Egyptian Mamluks see an opportunity. The Mamluks are themselves products of the Mongol conquests. Turkish and Circassian slave soldiers, purchased and trained by the Ayyubid sultans to fight crusaders. They've recently overthrown their masters and taken control of Egypt. They're hardened professional warriors, and they're terrified of the Mongols, but they're also calculating. Kibuka's 20,000 men are formidable but finite. The Mamluk Sultan, Qutuz, assembles an army of roughly 20,000 to 25,000 men and marches north to intercept the Mongols. The two armies meet at Ain Jalut, the Spring of Goliath, in present-day northern Israel, on September 3rd, 1260. The Mamluks employ a strategy that the Mongols themselves usually use. They bait the enemy with a feigned retreat. A Mamluk vanguard under Baibars engages Kipuka's forces, then withdraws, drawing the Mongols forward into a valley where the main Mamluk army is hidden. When the Mongols pursue, they find themselves surrounded. It's a trap worthy of Genghis Khan himself. The battle is fierce. Kipuka fights with legendary courage, refusing to retreat even when the situation becomes hopeless. He is captured and executed on the battlefield. His army is destroyed. For the first time in decades, the Mongol war machine suffers a decisive, irreversible defeat. Ain Jalut doesn't destroy the Mongol Empire. The Mongols continue to rule Persia for another century, but it stops their westward expansion. Europe, probably without realizing it, has been saved by the Mamluks. The Mongol Empire, which at its height stretches from Korea to Hungary, from Siberia to Syria, has reached its maximum extent. It will never expand further. Instead, it will begin the slow process of fragmentation into rival khanates. Now, let's return to a question that haunts historians. How many people did the Mongol conquest kill? The often cited figure is 40 to 60 million, drawn from column 70 in Richard Jones' 1978 Atlas of World Population History. This number has been repeated so often it's become accepted fact, but recent scholarship questions it. Msevedy and Jones' methodology is criticized for relying on incomplete data and making broad assumptions about pre-Mongol populations. The truth is we don't have accurate censuses for most of the 13th century. Medieval chroniclers, both Mongol and their victims, exaggerated numbers routinely. Persian chroniclers had incentive to inflate death tolls to emphasize the horror. Mongol chroniclers sometimes inflated them for the opposite reason, to terrify future enemies. What we can say with confidence: China's recorded population dropped from approximately 120 million before the Mongol invasion to roughly 60 million by 1300, according to census records. But scholars like Timothy Brooke argue that much of this decline reflects administrative failure. Millions of peasants fleeing south and never being re-registered, rather than pure mortality. How many actually died versus how many disappeared into the countryside? We don't know. Similarly, Persia's population is estimated to have fallen from roughly 2.5 million to 250,000. Did 10% survive? Or did survivors flee to regions that weren't properly counted? It's impossible to be certain. What is certain? The Mongol conquest caused demographic collapse on a scale rarely seen in human history. Whether the true figure is 20 million or 60 million almost doesn't matter. It's mass death on a civilization-ending scale. And here's the truly chilling part. Much of this death wasn't accidental. It wasn't the unavoidable byproduct of warfare. It was deliberate policy. The Mongols weaponized terror. They calculated that if they made resistance so horrifically costly that cities would surrender at the mere rumor of their approach, they could conquer with minimal casualties to their own forces. And it worked. By the time Mongol armies reached Europe in 1241, Polish and Hungarian princes knew what was coming. They knew about Merv and Nishapur and Baghdad, yet this knowledge didn't help them. At the Battle of Liegnitz in Poland and the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, Mongol armies destroyed much larger European forces. After these victories, Mongol scouts ranged as far west as Vienna and the Adriatic coast. Then, suddenly, they withdrew, not because Europe resisted successfully, but because the great Khan Ogidi died, and Mongol law required the generals to return to Mongolia. Europe was spared by accident, by internal Mongol politics, not by its own strength. Let's examine some specific tactics that made the Mongols so devastatingly effective. First, speed. Mongol armies could cover 60 to 100 miles per day, 2 to 3 times faster than any contemporary European army. Each warrior had multiple horses, rotating between them to maintain pace. This mobility allowed the Mongols to appear where they were thought impossible, to attack before enemies could coordinate defenses, and to escape before reinforcements arrived. Second, intelligence. The Mongols pioneered systematic military intelligence. They sent spies ahead of their armies, often merchants or travelers who wouldn't attract suspicion, to map terrain, identify defenses, and assess political divisions. By the time a Mongol army arrived, they knew exactly where the enemy's food supplies were, which gates were weakest, in which local factions might betray their rulers for Mongol favor. Third, psychological warfare. The Mongols deliberately cultivated their reputation for brutality. They spread stories of their atrocities, sometimes exaggerating them. A city that heard the Mongols massacred everyone in the previous city might surrender immediately to avoid the same fate. This saved Mongol lives and resources. It was terrorism as military strategy, and it was hideously effective. Fourth, adaptability. The Mongols began as nomadic horse archers with no siege experience. Within 2 decades, they had mastered siege warfare, incorporating Chinese, Persian, and European engineers into their ranks. They adopted gunpowder weapons from China, psychological tactics from Persia, and battlefield discipline from their enemies. They were a learning organization, constantly evolving. Fifth, meritocracy. Unlike medieval European armies where command was determined by noble birth, the Mongols promoted based on ability. Subutai, probably the greatest Mongol general after Genghis himself, was the son of a blacksmith. Jeeb was a former enemy who shot Genghis Khan's horse out from under him in battle. Yet when he surrendered, Genghis made him a general. This ruthless meritocracy meant Mongol armies were led by the most competent commanders available, not the best born. And finally, logistics. Mongol armies didn't have supply trains in the traditional sense. They lived off the land in their herds. Each warrior carried dried meat and milk curds that could sustain him for weeks. Horses could graze on steppe grass. This logistical independence meant Mongol armies could campaign in areas where conventional armies would starve. When they besieged cities, they forced local populations to supply food under threat of massacre. Enemy civilians became their logistics network. But we must also ask, were the Mongols uniquely brutal, or were they just more successful at brutality? Medieval warfare everywhere was horrific. European crusaders massacred Jerusalem's population in 1099, killing Muslims, Jews, and even Eastern Christians in an orgy of violence. The crusaders literally waded through blood in the streets. Chinese, Persian, and Arab armies regularly engaged in mass killings when cities fell. The Mongols were part of a brutal era. What distinguished them was scale and efficiency. They industrialized atrocity, systematized terror, and deployed it strategically. A European army might massacre a city in rage. The Mongols massacred cities coldly, deliberately, as part of a calculated strategy to make future conquests easier. The long-term consequences of the Mongol conquests are staggering and paradoxical. On one hand, they created the largest contiguous empire in history, facilitating trade and cultural exchange across Eurasia. The Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, meant that a merchant could travel from Beijing to Baghdad with a Mongol passport and be relatively safe. Ideas, technologies, and goods flowed along the Silk Road as never before. Paper money, gunpowder, printing technology, Persian astronomy, Chinese medicine, all spread across the empire. Marco Polo's famous journey to China was only possible because of Mongol roads and Mongol law. So in this sense, the Mongols connected the world in ways that prefigured later globalization. On the other hand, they destroyed irreplaceable centers of learning and culture. The libraries of Merv, Nishapur, and Baghdad contain knowledge that is lost forever. We will never know what scientific discoveries or literary masterpieces were burned. The irrigation systems that sustained Persian and Central Asian agriculture, built over millennia, were deliberately wrecked. Some regions still haven't recovered. The demographic catastrophe depopulated vast areas, allowing forests to regrow on what had been farmland. Some historians even argue the Mongol conquest inadvertently helped mitigate climate change by killing so many people that carbon dioxide levels dropped measurably. Imagine that. A genocide so vast affects global climate. Whether this actually happened or is historical speculation remains debated, but the mere fact that serious scholars discuss it reveals the scale we're talking about. The Mongols also inadvertently spread the Black Death. In 1346, during the siege of Kaffa in Crimea, the Mongol army was struck by plague. They catapulted diseased corpses into the city, probably hoping to cause panic. Instead, they introduced the plague to trade routes. Genoese merchants fleeing Kaffa carried the disease to Europe, sparking the Black Death pandemic that killed 30 to 60% of Europe's population. Whether the Mongols can be blamed for the Black Death is disputed. The plague might have spread anyway, but they certainly accelerated its transmission. The psychological and cultural scars lasted for centuries. In Persian and Arab literature, the Mongol invasion is remembered as an apocalypse, a punishment from God, a civilizational trauma. The great Persian poet Rumi, who lived through the Mongol invasions as a child, carried the memory his entire life. His father fled westward from Balkh ahead of the Mongol army, a refugee caravan witnessing the destruction of everything familiar. This experience of catastrophic loss infuses Rumi's poetry with themes of impermanence and divine mystery. In Russian chronicles, the Mongols are the Tatar yoke, a dark age lasting 240 years. The Russians defined themselves in opposition to Mongol rule, using liberation from the Tatars as a foundational national myth. Even today, Tatar carries negative connotations in Russian despite having been absorbed into Russian culture. Perhaps most significantly, the Mongol conquest demonstrated that civilization is fragile. Cities that believed themselves eternal, Merv, Nishapur, Baghdad, were erased. Empires that seemed invincible, the Khwarazmians, the Abbasids, the Jin dynasty, vanished. The lesson was clear and terrifying. No matter how advanced your culture, how sophisticated your architecture, how vast your libraries, it can all be undone by determined violence. This realization haunts the human consciousness. We build thinking our achievements are permanent. The Mongols prove they're not. And yet, ironically, the Mongols themselves demonstrated that empires built on terror cannot last. Within a century of Genghis Khan's death, the Mongol Empire had fragmented into rival khanates that warred with each other. The descendants of the conquerors became absorbed into the cultures they conquered. In Persia, the Mongol Ilkhans converted to Islam and became Persian in all but name. In China, the Mongol Yuan dynasty was overthrown in 1368, replaced by the native Ming dynasty. In Russia, the Golden Horde gradually weakened and splintered. By 1500, the Mongol Empire was a memory. The peoples they conquered endured. The cities they destroyed were rebuilt, sometimes in new locations, sometimes on the old ruins. The irrigation systems were slowly, painfully restored. Culture, that fragile thing the Mongols tried to erase, persisted. There's a bitter irony in the fact that we remember Genghis Khan as a great conqueror. We name restaurants after him. Mongolia celebrates him as a national hero. There are statues, museums, even an international airport named in his honor. Yet if we truly confronted what he did, the millions of corpses, the erased civilizations, the children murdered for being too tall, the libraries burned, the cultures annihilated, would we celebrate him? Or would we recognize him as one of history's greatest monsters? The answer is uncomfortable because it forces us to acknowledge that we admire successful violence. We respect power, even genocidal power, if it's wielded effectively enough and from sufficient historical distance. Genghis Khan killed more people than Hitler and Stalin combined, yet he's a fascinating historical figure rather than a figure of pure evil. Why? Perhaps because his victims are ancient, their pain sufficiently distant that we can aestheticize their suffering. Or perhaps because he won. History is written by victors, and Genghis Khan's victories were so total, so overwhelming, that he transcended normal moral categories and entered the realm of myth. But here's the challenge. Can we hold two truths simultaneously? Can we acknowledge that the Mongol Empire facilitated unprecedented cultural exchange and trade while also recognizing it was built on oceans of blood? Can we study Mongol military tactics and marvel at their sophistication while also mourning the millions those tactics killed? Can we appreciate that Genghis Khan unified fractious tribes and created a legal code that, within the empire, provided order and protection, while also confronting the fact that this order was purchased with mass murder and enslavement? The answer must be yes. History is not comfortable. It doesn't offer easy heroes and villains. The Mongol invasions were simultaneously one of the most significant connective events in human history and one of its greatest atrocities. Both things are true. The roads the Mongols built connected civilizations. The cities they destroyed were irreplaceable. The knowledge they burned is lost forever. The trade they facilitated enriched the world. These contradictions don't cancel each other out. They coexist, forcing us to grapple with complexity. As I conclude, I want to return to where we started, Merv. Today, if you visit the site of ancient Merv in Turkmenistan, you'll find ruins in the desert, crumbling walls, eroded foundations, pottery shards scattered in the sand. UNESCO has designated it a World Heritage Site, recognizing its historical importance. But standing there in the silence, it's hard to imagine this was once the mother of the world, a metropolis of hundreds of thousands, a center of learning and culture. It's hard to imagine the screams, the rivers of blood, the pyramids of severed heads. The desert has swallowed that horror, leaving only stones and silence. And maybe that's a mercy. Maybe we're not meant to fully comprehend atrocity on that scale. Maybe our minds can't hold it without breaking. But we must try. We must remember not to glorify Genghis Khan as simply a great warrior, but to see him fully. Brilliant strategist, unifier, lawgiver, and architect of genocide. We must remember that behind every statistic, every million dead, every city erased, were individual human beings with hopes and fears and families. A child watching her father killed. A mother tortured to reveal hidden treasure. A scholar watching centuries of accumulated knowledge burn. These weren't abstractions. They were people as real as you or I, who suffered and died in ways we can barely imagine. The Mongol invasions remind us that civilization is precious and precarious. That human knowledge, once lost, may never be recovered. That power without morality leads to nightmare. That the capacity for organized violence exists in every culture, and that we build empires on foundations of suffering more often than we'd like to admit. These are uncomfortable lessons, but they are necessary. Because if we don't learn from history, if we don't grapple with its darkest chapters, we risk repeating them. Different actors, different weapons, same fundamental human capacity for cruelty in pursuit of power. So when you hear the name Genghis Khan, remember Merv, remember Nishapur, remember Baghdad, remember the libraries burning, the children measured against wagon wheels, the rivers running black with ink and red with blood. Remember that the largest contiguous empire in history was built not on ideas or culture or innovation, but on fear, on systematic terror, on the calculated use of mass murder as statecraft. Remember and ask yourself, what does it say about us that we still, 800 years later, find this man fascinating rather than simply monstrous? What does it say that we name restaurants after him, put his face on currency, build statues in his honor? Are we celebrating a historical figure? Or are we worshiping power itself, regardless of how much blood it spilled? These are questions without easy answers, but they are questions worth asking. The Mongol invasions, for all their horror, teach us about human nature, both its capacity for extraordinary organizational achievement and its capacity for extraordinary evil. Sometimes those capacities exist in the same people, pursuing the same goals. That's the brutal truth behind history's deadliest empire. Not that it was uniquely evil, but that it was supremely successful at something dark that lives in all human societies. The willingness to destroy others to expand ourselves. The Mongols conquered half the known world. In doing so, they connected it. They also nearly ended it. Both statements are true. Both must be remembered. That is their legacy. Not simple villainy or simple heroism, but the terrifying complexity of what humans can accomplish when they organize violence with genius and deploy it without mercy. The lesson echoes across centuries. Power is not morality. Success is not righteousness. And the greatest empires often cast the longest shadows. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's darkest chapters. If this story moved you or taught you something new, please share this video with someone who values the hidden truths of history. Don't forget to check out our next deep dive into the fall of the Roman Empire and what it tells us about societal collapse. The past isn't just behind us. It's the ground we're standing on, and understanding where we've been helps us see where we might be going. Hit that like button, subscribe for more historical deep dives, and remember, the most important history is often the hardest to confront.